JB Pritzker talks about education funding, and an upgrade at the Quincy Veterans home could cost $278 million. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Legislature's coming back to town next week. I think there's a campaign going on, but that's always the case in Illinois. To discuss it with me today, Charlie Wheeler is back. He is director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program, University of Illinois Springfield. Before his 2 decades doing that, longtime State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you, Bernie. It's always fun to be here.
And Brian Mackey is here. He is State House reporter for NPR Illinois, whose voice is on WUIS and all over the state from time to time, if I'm right.
I'm pretty sure you're right, but I don't listen elsewhere. So.
Okay, welcome back. Okay, so JB Pritzker, it's a couple weeks after the primary. He had a Chicago press conference, then he came down to Springfield the next day, had a press conference. At the Springfield event at the Illinois Education Association training facility on the west side of Springfield, he had 3 teachers, 2 from public schools, 1 from a college from Edwardsville, but one person from Springfield, person from Williamsville, basically saying there's a sign on his podium now, you know, Rauner failed me or something or whatever. This is the theme of his campaign at the moment. He once again said we need more money for schools, a more equitable system. Brian, you were there. Your review of, I know he's not giving specific plans yet for the progressive income tax and how he wants it to be there, but he wants more money for schools and the state to fund more and property taxes to fund less. So what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, he is doing a somewhat, I guess you could argue, risky, although I'm sure Charlie will dispute me on that, but campaigning in favor of a tax increase. It's not something that everybody does, although I guess Pat Quinn did that too 4 years ago. But we already raised taxes in Illinois last year, and the governor has made it one of his central critiques of Pritzker is you're going to raise taxes. So Pritzker is saying, yes, I do want a progressive or graduated income tax, although he is not saying what the rates would be. I mean, it's conceivable a lot of the plans that have been put forth in the past that a lot of taxpayers, perhaps even the majority of taxpayers, would see their rates go down. Right. But we don't know if that's what Pritzker's going to do.
And he was also on WJBC Radio in Bloomington just on Wednesday or Thursday, and he did say his idea is for most people to pay less, middle and lower. That
was more detailed than he gave to us when he was at our news conference.
But then higher income people should pay more. I don't know. Is it smart for him to not say rates at this time? I mean, the situation is we know Governor Rauner's campaign. When Jeannie Ives mentioned the name of Mike Madigan once at the Tribune editorial board, all of a sudden, Governor Rauner's campaign used tape of that to have Jeannie Ives saying something about Mike Madigan, and millions of dollars said she was Mike Madigan's favorite Republican. So if Pritzker would say a certain percentage that he wants people to pay, perhaps the other side would, make political hay of that and take it out of context. I'm not saying we don't want the information, but that is probably the kind of thing his advisors are telling him. Is that a fair assessment, Charlie?
Oh, certainly it is. Yeah, and I would be absolutely dumbfounded were Pritzker to lay out rates that Rauner wouldn't use it against him. That's kind of the name of the game. You go through and it's sort of like a ransom note where there's snippets cut out of different stories to make the ransom notes. You cut out snippets of what people said in different locations, paste them together, and make a commercial depicting your opponent as whatever you want him to be. But as a matter of fact, if we are ever to achieve funding education the way the Constitution lays out as a goal, where the state has the primary responsibility, it's going to require more revenue.
Yeah, currently the state of Illinois, and we discussed this with Mr. Pritzker, the state portion of paying public education in Illinois, K through 12, is about 25%. He indicated that it should be more like what the Constitution says and approach 50, and he talked about most states. I think, Charlie, you have some, perhaps, a better view of where that is. But again, that would, perhaps that would take pressure off property taxes. That's the idea. But it would take a higher more money from income taxes and a progressive income tax or something like it that Pritzker wants, which ultimately would take a constitutional amendment because we have a flat tax built into our Constitution. This is in the future, and this is what Governor Rauner continues to say. While he spends money from the last tax increase and says he wants to roll it back, he also says Pritzker wants to raise your taxes and job creators will shun Illinois and leave or not come here.
And I think it's worth pausing on this idea that Pritzker talked about. It's going to take at least, he says it's going to take 2 years to get a progressive income tax. I mean, that presumes that you can get it through the House and the Senate. And the Senate it's a more liberal Democratic caucus, but in the House there are plenty of Democrats who campaign on anti-tax platforms.
Right.
And so, if you assume that the Democrats are able to hold on to all the seats they have now, they still don't have a supermajority. And there are still plenty of Democrats who have campaigned that's why so many anti-tax people, that's why so many Republicans had to cross the aisle to raise taxes last year. So I'm not sure that it's 2 years is even the timeline that he thinks.
And after the legislature passed it as a constitutional amendment, it has to pass a general election. And
that do you
think it would be easy to pass?
I don't think it would be easy to pass. Certainly, a lot of people would spend money.
Millions would be spent against it too, saying they want to raise your taxes without being specific on who gets helped and hurt.
That's true, but one thing that's always baffled me a little bit about how Governor Rauner and his allies talk about the graduated income tax as a terrible, terrible, worst thing ever, is that it has significant polling support. The Paul Simon Public Policy Institute put this question out there a few years ago, and I'm just going off the top of my head here, but I want to say it was something like 60-70% of voters in Illinois favor this, including a significant number of Republican voters. So I'm sure that after a few $1 million, tens of millions of dollars in advertising against it, hypothetically, that those numbers would soften somewhat. But in the past, at least, it has had support among the voters. Whether the political establishment supports it is another question.
Yeah, Charlie, you think that could pass Illinois?
I think if it were to go before the voters, it would. But I think the difficulty, as Brian was suggesting, is getting it to the voters, because the Constitution for an amendment to be put before the voters requires the General Assembly to approve it by 3/5 majorities in both chambers, which is 71 in the House, 36 in the Senate. The Senate Democrats are in a position where they could do it unilaterally, but that would not be good politics.
Right, you don't want
You'd
it
have
to
to
be
do
a
it
Democratic
bipartisan,
tax increase.
right? And the House, as Brian said, they don't have enough members, and there are members who are pledged that they're not going to vote for any tax increase. Bipartisan agreement, and it's got to be structured in such a way that there is some limits on the disparity. The highest rate can't be more than X percent higher than the lowest rate, something like that. So you don't have a situation where
you're just taxing the super rich and everybody else is off the
and
hook.
nobody has any idea what it's going to be like. The thing is that all our neighboring states with income taxes have graduated tax, with the exception of Indiana, that has a flat rate. Most of the states with income taxes have a graduated rate, where higher levels of income are taxed at a higher percentage than lower levels of income. So on the first, let's say, the first $20,000 of income, everybody pays the same. On the last $1 million of income, you maybe pay twice what the percent of what you paid on your first $20,000. That's how the graduated rate works. It's like the federal income tax. And the voters, a couple of years ago, there was a referendum asking them, should there be a millionaire's tax, where there'd be a 3% surcharge on income above $1 million, and it would go to fund public schools, and it passed pretty overwhelmingly.
Right.
But
it got a lot more votes than Governor Rauner or Pat Quinn in that year's
But
election.
then the legislature didn't do it.
But it was
Right.
advisory, so it
Right.
had no
Right.
force of law to it.
Right. Okay. Speaking of millions of dollars, I'll just throw in here that JB Pritzker in the last several days put another $7 million into his campaign, so he's up to 76.5. We know Governor Rauner, over his entire campaign, the 4-year thing, I think he's put in something over 90, but in this current campaign, at the end of 2016, he threw $50 million into his own campaign. So we have two people with a lot of means who are going to spend it, and so if you are not watching public TV all the time and you're watching commercial TV, you're going to see a lot of those ads. Anyway, on we go. I mentioned as the show opened, that the Quincy Veterans Home, the Rauner administration has had a committee looking into this, and they've come up with a proposal potentially rebuilding or building a new building and making some other fixes, getting a new water source by building a well. Total cost at this point, $278 million. The Pritzkers say, the Pritzker campaign says, well, this has been an ongoing problem for a few years, and now you're talking a new number, let's see some action. Part of this plan could include moving people out of that home temporarily into temporary quarters as new facilities get built. And this is all because of an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease that's lasted over 3 years and has taken 13 lives, and it seems like it has not been completely resolved because of an old pipes. Reasonable for the Rauner administration to go forward with this, and politically, obviously, this is going to be something discussed in the campaign. Charlie?
I think it's a situation where we should go ahead and do it, but the question again is, where is the money going to come from? I've said all along that the administration should move people out of the one building on the campus where the problem exists, find alternate housing for them while they try and remediate the problem in the one building. Now, you can probably do this in steps. You don't need to maybe spend the whole amount initially. The idea of digging a new well is that the well water would come up at a colder temperature than the Mississippi River, where the city of Quincy gets its water, and the Legionella bacterium does better in warmer water. But is that something we absolutely need to do? And it's going to require a bipartisan effort, because I don't think the money's there to do this unless we enact some kind of a capital program. And to do a capital program, you have to have a revenue source to pay for it. Ideally, you'd create some kind of an additional revenue source, and then you go out and sell bonds to make these repairs, which are going to last for, who knows, 20, 25 years, you would hope, more than the lifetime of the bonds, and you'd be able to remedy the situation. In an election year, I don't know if that kind of cooperation is going to be there.
Right, and in general, as we know, it takes, and we saw it when Blagojevich didn't do a capital plan, it takes trust between the legislature and a governor to get the legislature to vote to issue those bonds, because they want to trust that the governor will spend the money on projects that are properly distributed and not just help certain people, or not just, but there just seems to be kind of a lack of trust between the governor, who has campaigned a lot and called Speaker of the House corrupt significantly or continually for 3 years, and the legislature trying to unelect this governor and put a Democrat in. Brian?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've already seen Representative Jeannie Ives in her primary campaign against the governor, use the Quincy home as a frequent campaign message, and we've already seen JB Pritzker picking that up and using it against Governor Rauner. And it's something where, as you pointed out, it's an ongoing problem. People are still getting sick this year, and it's particularly unusual, from what I understand, for these illnesses to happen in winter. It's usually something that's more likely in the summertime when there's high humidity, just because of the way the Legionella bacteria is transmitted.
Water vapor.
Right, exactly. So it's something that seems like any day you never know if there's going to be another report of another illness or something like that. So it continues to be a human concern, obviously, for the veterans and their spouses who are living there, but also a political issue.
Right. Well, and we'll go on. And there was actually a couple of public radio reporters. Was it also Dave McKinney and Tony Arnold who did a follow-up? They did the initial story about the 13 cases over a number of years. They did a lot of research and basically moved the story to the front burner some months ago. They've done another story where they finally got some emails from the Rauner administration about handling of the Quincy situation outbreak as it occurred. And a lot of the documents they got had redactions, big black splotches or boxes in the middle of the page, where the Rauner administration says, well, these were just policy in process, we could take this out. But WBEZ reporters, the public station in Chicago, they had received many of the same emails that they had requested from a different unit of government, the Adams County and Quincy Public Health Department, and they ended up doing a story just this week comparing unredacted versions of those things, including like a spokeswoman for the department saying, there was, can we quit having fun now. I mean, making kind of a snide comment that shouldn't be made in a case of life and death. We don't want to say that was the most horrible thing, but you can tell that they were dealing with public relations problems and trying to figure out how to deal with this. But again, this allowed the Pritzker people to say that the Rauner administration is hiding something. Brian, situation.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very clever bit of reporting to, FOIA multiple government agencies, and apparently the Adams County officials were not on board with the governor's administration's redaction plans for these messages. So I certainly appreciate that. I'm not sure that, I'm also not too surprised that people who are paid to be PR consultants for the state are doing their job and talking about PR. I guess that's what they're supposed to do.
Sure.
On the other hand, it's anything that sort of shows anything but we're just concerned about the people who are getting sick and dying and their relatives here certainly doesn't look good from a political standpoint.
And we will hear much more about this situation, and it is, we just hope nobody else gets sick and we move on. And it has been a while since anything occurred, although there was a little gastric outbreak or something, but that's not Legionella, so they had another little problem there. And moving to another issue, and I often say at the beginning of this show, we talk about federal issues. Well, President Trump recently said he wanted to put tariffs on steel and aluminum, and then China put tariffs on some items or talked about it. And pork and soybeans are on that list. I think pork might already be on, and soybeans might come in the future. And pork and soybeans are two major exports from Illinois farmers. So this is creating a question of what to do. Tammy Duckworth, U.S. Senator, put out a statement on this saying that the president should stop his reckless rhetoric. And I urge the president to put down his phone, get off Twitter, and proceed responsibly. I'm not sure that President Trump is listening to everything Tammy Duckworth is saying, but what implications does this have for Illinois, Charlie?
Well, I think if it were to go through, it would be a real problem for Illinois farmers because we are one of the leading export states in terms of both pork and soybeans. I think we're number one in soybeans.
I think so.
And something like 2/3 of the soybean crop goes to China, where it's processed in the soy meal to be fed to hogs, and some of it's used for foodstuffs. And if that market were cut off to us because of the higher prices, there are other countries that would be willing to step in and pick up the slack. Brazil is right behind the United States in terms of soybean production, according to what I've read. And it's a concern for manufacturers who rely on selling their products to farm families, implement dealers, for example. So there could be a real, I don't know, I don't want to say devastating, but certainly a real negative effect.
And it's interesting
on the Illinois
because
economy.
If you look at the Illinois map, I'm sure a lot of the Trump support, and Illinois is a blue state, but that's mostly because of our giant urban areas, Chicago and the Metro East. In the middle, Trump did well, even though Hillary Clinton won the state by, I think it was 17 points. But a lot of Trump supporters would be in industries that would be affected by this.
Well, yeah, the polling, not the polling, the exit data from the polling places showed that farmers tended to support President Trump more so than candidate Clinton. And so this is going against them. And someone else noted that it's will not impact just Illinois, a blue state, but it will impact a lot of the farm states in the Great Plains that were overwhelmingly voting for President Trump.
Right. And again,
I saw a Washington Post writer or columnist on Twitter smarter about this stuff than I am. I should full disclosure, I don't cover international economics or Congress full time.
Oh, come on, Brian.
But she pointed out that apparently the ambassador to China is from Iowa, and it almost seemed like the list of things that China was targeting were very tied into the Iowa economy. But this is something where I'm interested to see how various Republican legislators in Illinois react to this. We've already seen Congressman Mike Bost, who's got a re-election fight on his hands.
Down in Southern Illinois, Carbondale
Metro
area.
East Steel is reinstating 500 jobs, and he says this is the president's, economic policy is bringing these jobs back. But in a lot of other places in the state, as Charlie's been pointing out, where you have soybean farmers, hog farmers is a big industry. I mean, there's not going to be as many headlines because it's not 500 people getting together and walking into a single factory. It's spread out all over the entire state. But presumably more than 500 farmers are going to be not happy with this
Negatively
policy.
impact, yeah.
So I'm interested to see how they respond.
Yeah, and there's another federal issue that the Trump administration, in gathering the next U.S. Census, wants to ask a question that apparently hasn't been on the general form for everybody since 1950, although it's been on some longer forms, like that 14% of the people get, asking if you're a citizen. And there are people who say the census is just supposed to count people, no matter citizen or not. It's supposed to be private, on an individual basis. But if you ask people if they're a citizen, then a lot of non-citizens may not talk to you, may hide from that survey. That means the census could report a lower population number, which means less federal funding and possibly the loss of an extra congressional seat in the U.S. House. So politically, that is a question that Lisa Madigan, the Attorney General of Illinois, who's a Democrat, is among attorneys general who is trying to get the federal government through court action not to ask the citizenship question. And in the race for Attorney General, because Lisa Madigan isn't running for re-election, Kwame Raoul, the Democrat, came out early and said he's against the question. And then a couple days later, Erica Harold, the Republican candidate for Attorney General, who is backed by Governor Rauner, said she is also against the question. Oddly, the Rauner administration said it's a legitimate question, and so Erica Harold, while getting support from the governor, has broken with him on this issue. I don't know where this goes, but it kind of shows that everybody in Illinois is kind of in line with that.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that if Bruce Rauner were really in sync with what's good for Illinois, he would also pose the question, because I see that as part of a Republican plan to try and discourage minorities from registering to vote, for being counted in the census, as a way to reduce Democratic voting power. Because Democrats enjoy, for example, among Hispanic voters, Democrats enjoy a huge advantage, mostly because of the anti-immigrant rhetoric coming from President Trump and his allies about Mexicans are rapists and murderers and all that nonsense. And so it's part of a pattern to try and get at the Democratic base. And if you do discourage people from getting themselves counted, as you said, then our population is artificially lower than what it actually is, and as a result, we lose representation. And it's been an ongoing problem. For decades, the census has taken all kinds of steps to try and make sure everybody is counted, going to extraordinary lengths to try and get an accurate count of everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or not. They want to know how many bodies are there within our borders. And this would tend to hurt that count and make it just suspect. The Constitution doesn't say you count just citizens, or you just count registered voters. It's the census is supposed to be of everybody.
Yeah, as a former census taker, full
Did
disclosure.
you really do that?
2000, I was a supervisor, and I also participated in a special census in my hometown in the 90s.
What hometown?
Crete, Illinois.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
South of
1995.
Chicago.
So it is a difficult job to get people to answer these questions. I supervised teams that were going into Joliet and knocking on doors, and you have to go 6 different times. You have to make 6 attempts to contact a household. At least in 2000, you did.
Wow.
So they do go to steps to try and get people, but if you have, as Charlie says, the fear is if you put a question on there that's going to discourage participation, it makes it that much harder.
The things you learn on this show, Brian, I'm impressed. There's news about the Governor Rauner that one thing has to do with The Godfather and one thing has to do with being a grandfather. We'll do the grandfather first just to make sure we get it said before the show is over, but congratulations to Governor Rauner. He did announce this week that a daughter of his, he's got 6 children, had a baby girl, and so he is a grandfather for the first time, and very happy about that, so congratulations are in order. Well, I think we all agree on that.
Well, to the governor and to his wife also.
And that's right. Yes.
First Lady
Diana
Rauner.
That's right.
And
So
I hope his kids get some sleep.
And this might explain why he's had a couple days with no public events. But also, Diana and Bruce Rauner, it turns out, had a collection of the papers of Mario Puzo, the author of The Godfather, and they have donated them. It came out through a publication from Dartmouth, I think, to the governor. Maybe it was both of their colleges. Dartmouth College, where there is a Rauner library. They have donated those papers including some notes about, I guess, The Godfather and its characters, to the Dartmouth Library. And I don't know what we make of that, but it's an interesting thing.
Leave the paper, take the cannoli.
That's right. Charlie, are you a Godfather fan, and does this mean that Bruce Rauner is going to act like one? I don't know.
No, to be honest, I'm not much of a Godfather fan.
Well, it was an interesting trilogy back in the day. I will also say before we leave that Congressman Darren LaHood, who represents half of Springfield from his Peoria district, recently said that he wishes the Trump administration would finally name a U.S. attorney for the Central District of Illinois. It's been, 15 months or so. John Childress is serving as an appointee in that position, but there are 4 people that were forwarded to the administration some time ago, including John Milheiser, the Sangamon County State's attorney, and we're waiting to see who will be the next federal prosecutor for Central Illinois to handle various cases, including the ongoing one about former Congressman Aaron Schock, which may or may not ever get to trial. So with that, I'm going to thank Charlie Wheeler and Brian Mackey for your help. Thank you for watching. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.